is a writing guide for fiction authors, written by Chuck Palahniuk, who's a very respected writer with a big following. It was published in 2020, and the book is full of writing tips interspersed with funny true stories from Chuck Palahniuk when he's been on book tours over the years. The writing tips in this book are very practical, very useful, and I personally found the stories hilarious as well. Some of the practical tips that I read in this book are, number one, Chuck Palahniuk advises you to give the main protagonist of your story a dead parent. Apparently, when people see that the character's got a dead parent, they kind of sympathise with the character more, because a parent dying is very tragic to anybody, and if the main character has been through that ordeal, it makes people connect with them more and kind of get behind them a lot more. So that's a little tip I learned, which I'm going to use in my stories as well. Another one is to always have a clock and a gun in your story. A clock is fairly obvious and well known. A clock could be, if you're writing a thriller story, there could be a bomb in the story, like a time bomb, and the characters have to go through an ordeal and kind of defuse the bomb before it explodes. That's an obvious example. A gun, what he means by a gun is something that can wrap the story up at the end. A good example is The Shining. I think this applies to the book. I'm only familiar with the film of The Shining, but there's a boiler room in the hotel in The Shining. And in the book, I think at the end, that boiler explodes and it causes the whole entire hotel to collapse. That's a gun. It's something that can blow something up at the end, right? So you've got a clock and a gun. It's quite a good little tip there. He also advises to avoid using times and measurements in your writing. So instead of saying it was 10 a.m. as the man walked into the bar, or instead of saying the building was 15 foot high, you should say things like, the sky was dark as he walked into the bar, or the building was as tall as a bus, or something like that. Be quite vague rather than be technical and specific. The other advice is to make it verby. Verby sentences tend to resonate with readers more. I think that he cites an experiment in the book. Apparently, when people read action verbs, it ignites a certain section of our brains. Our brains like verbs, and we can kind of picture ourselves in the story more when we read verbs. So you should always make things verby. I'm currently reading a book called Dead Men's Trousers by Irvine Welsh, and he makes use of this verb thing. In a chapter I just read, he turns the word taxi into a verb. Instead of saying he jumped in a taxi to the airport, he writes something like he taxied to the airport. So you should turn nouns into verbs whenever possible, make everything verby. Another interesting thing he points out is, if you're writing a story, you've got a bunch of characters, and let's say the story takes place in a certain building or somebody's home. It's a good thing at some point during the story to take those characters outside of their familiar surroundings, out into unknown territory, just to kind of highlight the fact that they're vulnerable in some way. The example that he uses in the book is One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I have read. That story's got several characters and they're all in a mental home. In the book, at least, there's a scene where they all get taken out of the home on a day trip, and they go to the ocean and do a bit of, they do some kind of fishing in the ocean. And the scene kind of highlights the fact that they're all very vulnerable, and they're all outsiders when they're taken out of their cozy, not cozy, when they're taken out of their usual home. They're kind of portrayed as being very vulnerable, and then they go back to the home later, and it makes you see the characters in a different light. Some of these true stories in the book I loved. True stories that Chuck Palahniuk has witnessed, or they're stories that he's heard from other people. A good one is he has a friend called Kim, and he was sitting in a coffee shop with her, and she told him this story. She was once assigned to help Stephen King at a book signing event, this woman called Kim. It was in a church in Seattle, and there were 5,000 people there who all wanted Stephen King to sign their books. I don't know what year this was, but it was in Seattle. And after a short time, Stephen King's shoulder started to hurt because he was signing so many books. And so this woman, Kim, had an ice pack, and she was holding the ice pack against Stephen King's shoulder to make it numb, or to soothe the pain. And Stephen King, because he's done so much writing, apparently he's got calluses on his forefinger and thumb, just where he's held so many pens over the years. And as he was signing these books, the calluses split and blood dripped out onto the book that he was signing. And the person whose book it was actually loved it, because I think it was a horror book, and so he had not only a signed copy by Stephen King, but there was a drop of Stephen King's blood on the book as well, and he loved it. And then the next person in the queue saw what had happened, and then he wanted the same. So Stephen King, he ended up, for the next 8 hours, Stephen King was signing everybody's book and then putting a drop of blood in the book as well. And after 8 hours of this, signing books is tiring enough, but he'd actually lost quite a significant amount of blood as well. And so at the end of the book signing event, he actually had to be carried out of the church by his bodyguards, by the security. He was so weak. And then he got taken into a car and drove away from the book signing event. But there were some people there who didn't get their books signed, and they actually chased after the car in their own car and rammed the car off the road and actually wrecked Stephen King's car. I don't know what happened after that, but that alone is quite crazy. I don't know what year this was or anything, but that happened. It was in Seattle. Chuck Palahniuk likes to use something called crowd seeding. So he tells, when he's at a party or something, he likes to tell stories that other people can relate to. And then they ended up telling him their versions of the story, of like similar stories that have happened to them. Chuck Palahniuk used to work in a freightliner factory where they build lorries. And he tells this story of when he was an apprentice there, some of the workers asked him to go and find a squeegee sharpener, which is just a joke tool that doesn't exist, right? And when he tells this story, he often gets other people telling him similar stories of when they were apprentices and they were the butt of some kind of joke. And he was talking to a vet surgeon in Paris, a very smartly dressed man at this party. He was wearing a suit and tie and leather shoes and stuff. And he was telling Chuck Palahniuk about how he spent years trying to get accepted into this vet academy. And he finally managed to get accepted. and there was a party to welcome him as a vet. And at the party, somebody put a sedative, like a sleeping tablet, into his glass of wine. And then the next thing he knew, he passed out. They drugged his wine and he passed out. And while he was passed out, all of these work colleagues, these vets, stripped him naked and they put him inside a horse, a dead horse that was like at the back in a hidden room at this party. The horse had been cut open and they opened the horse's stomach and they put this bloke inside the horse and then they stitched up the horse's belly. And then they just went back to the party and started drinking and chatting amongst each other as they were. And then eventually this man woke up inside the belly of this horse. He didn't have a clue what had happened or where he was. Everything was black. It was hot, it was sweaty, he was claustrophobic. He started panicking, but he could hear voices outside. And when everybody saw the horse's belly started moving, they knew that he'd woken up and they all started shouting, "Fight, fight, fight your way out." And so he started ripping his way out of this dead horse. And then he poked his head out and he saw everybody standing there drinking wine and he remembered that he was at a party. And somebody passed him a glass of wine and he took the wine, he got out the horse, he started drinking again, starting this daze. And then everybody told him what had happened and he worked out that this was some kind of veterinary indoctrination. They do it to everybody who becomes a vet, and everybody at the party had had the same experience, and so he now had a shared experience with everybody at the party. And another reason they did it as well, because being a vet, it can be a horrible job. You have to put down animals, and so now that he had experienced that awful situation, from then on, it didn't matter what he had to do as a vet, nothing would have been as bad as that horse experience. He tells another story of a book signing event involving dead mice, which I won't go into because I don't want to completely ruin the book for you. And he also mentions Clive Barker. Apparently Clive Barker was at a book signing event once. Clive Barker, he used to write these quite gory books like Hellraiser, lots of blood and guts and gore. Apparently he was at a book signing event, it might have been in England, and a fan came over, a reader, as he was signing books, and he said, "Clive, this is for you." And then he pulled out a razor blade and slashed both of his wrists at the book signing event, blood everywhere. I might look this up to see what I can find online, because I don't know anything about it. He skims over it in this book. He just briefly mentions it. But apparently that happened at a Clive Barker book signing event. I consider Chuck Palahniuk to be a proper writer. He often speaks of workshops that he attended during the 90s with Tom Spanbauer. And he mentions this in the book as well. He paid a lot of money back in the day to learn how to write, and he went to these writing workshops, which was, I think they were at Tom Spanbauer's house. Tom Spanbauer was an author. I think he died a few years ago, and he held these workshops at his house, and he was very knowledgeable, and he passed on his knowledge to Chuck Palahniuk and other writers as well. So I consider Chuck Palahniuk to be the real deal. He's committed his life to the craft, and he obviously loves books, and he loves the craft of writing. He's been, I think he published his first book in the 90s, Fight Club, and it got turned into a major film. So that was pretty good going. What was it? His first book? I think he might have written one book before that. which I believe was called If You Lived Here, You'd Be Home Already. I haven't read it, but I think he admits that that book wasn't that good. But he's done well as a writer. I think, Fight Club, maybe it was his second book, but that it got turned into a great film, and that helped his success. It's weird, really. I keep going back to Chuck Palahniuk, even though I haven't enjoyed all of his books, every one that I've read. I've read quite a few now. Fight Club, Damned, Haunted. Haunted is my favourite. I've read Snuff as well. Snuff was quite good. I haven't enjoyed them all. I compare him to Bret Easton Ellis, really. I like both of their work, although I don't always enjoy reading their work. For example, I love American Psycho, even though I don't fully enjoy reading it. It's quite a torturous book to read. But I recognise that they're works of art. Their books are true art, And in this age of AI that we're now entering into, I think real writers, proper writers, should be valued. And I think that's the way it's going to go now. With people publishing these AI books, I think people are just going to head towards writers they know and love more and more. People who are proper writers, and they're in it for the love of doing it, not just for the money. I'm going to read Chuck Palahniuk's newest book soon, which is called Shock Induction. So look out for a review of that. I'm probably going to end up reviewing it. I gave this book, consider this, 5 stars. I did enjoy it, and if you're a writer and you're serious about the craft, and you're not just one of these people who want to go on bloody ChatGPT to get your book written for you, I do recommend reading this book because it's very insightful and it'll help you become a proper writer. Thanks very much for watching. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another book review. In the meantime, try to have a good day on this wordy, bookish, literary piece of rock we call Earth. Lots of love. Goodbye.